Hello, welcome to the tutorial in the EQUIMOV webpage equity movement of the variables in the equity zones. You will need to click on the EQUIMOV charts interactive. Once you've clicked on that, you will see a window popping up with this is in Spanish. If yours is in English, well, it's just the same. Download that database. Wait here till it reaches 7.1 megabytes and open up that database. Now that database is the basis of a lot of our studies. Of course, some of the detailed analysis are not shown, but the main ones are. So what you will see here is this database showing up. It has a number of spreadsheets. We've gone through a few of them in the previous tutorials, either the weighted life expectancy and GDP in the world, weighted average, the country years where countries were meeting the healthy and sustainable criteria, the models, the country models that were consistently meeting the three criteria, and how we defined in those models the main variables. That helped us compare those countries and their mortality rates in every 5-year age group with the rest of the world, and that helped us estimate the through interactive graphs, the avoidable deaths, the proportion of avoidable deaths, the avoidable DALYs, the life years lost per avoidable death, even the interactive graph on survival pyramids. Now, you may have seen that tutorial, but now let's look at this one. The first thing you have to do is to here habilitate your addition capacity. So you will see in this this spreadsheet called Threshold GDP and Population by Equities in Equity and Hoarding Zone. You will see a number of data. Now this data, you can see it here a bit more clear. The lowest rows of data show you the thresholds of first the weighted average of GDP, the weighted average of efficient, healthy, and sustainable models, the maximum, the upper threshold of the equity zone, and the hoarding threshold. You can see in this graph, or you can make them yourselves if you're a bit familiar with Excel, how these different thresholds have been evolving from 1961 till 2001. And there's been a spread out, if you want, of the particularly a big exponential squeeze of the hoarding threshold. The others have been also growing. The lower threshold has not been growing much, so therefore the equity zone has been expanding, particularly the limits and the differences between the equity zone and the hoarding threshold. Now, what you may see here is that what we've done is define in these different equity zones how does the population feature the GDP, and you can see that here in net numbers in this graph. This is how the population has been growing, and the population that belongs to either the hoarding or excess accumulation, the excess or surplus, the equity zone, and the deficit zone. Please note that here around the late 90s there is a bit of an artifact, because Vietnam showed very low GDP per capita as estimated by the World Bank. There was a big dip, and we've reflected that. We didn't want to avoid it, and so it shows that, and it combines also with a big increase of the equity zone also around those years because of the joining of China of the equity zone. This is how it looks like in terms of the proportion of the population in each of the zones, and this is how the GDP performs. Also this exponential increase of the GDP, but a big share of that, over 50%, in the small proportion of, remember, the population that belong to the hoarding threshold. So basically less than 10% of the countries in the world concentrate more than 50% or close to that the wealth, and this is what remains for the surplus zone, for the equity zone, and for the deficit zone. Very, very small share of that. So this is the relation between surplus and excess accumulation. Now this helps us to basically look at this other spreadsheet we want to show to you, the variables by equity zones. Now this is an interactive graph like the ones in the previous tutorials on the avoidable and proportion of avoidable debts. What you have to do is you need to delete this graph and start from scratch, insert a new graph of this kind, and now choose your variables. This is divided into the deficit zone, equity zone, surplus zone, and excess accumulation zone. So if you click on any of these numbers, you will see this field here of different variables that you can choose from. The way to choose a variable is choose now population. So you bring population to here, values, and you click on this arrow and you configure that value so it shows the sum, the addition of population in each of the zones. So let me do this again by clicking here. So this is how it looks. It will help you have a better impression of how the population is distributed in these different zones. You can delete that. And you can do the same for others. If you see that the population is distributed like that, you can also delete that to have a better view. You can now, and you can of course set different equity zones, periods, sex, and age groups. But let's look at for instance, the total avoidable debts. How many avoidable debts are distributed? You need to put it here in values, and then instead of count, you change the field to sum addition, and this is and to get rid of this number, so you just bring this back. So this is how avoidable debts are distributed. In fact, they are somehow negative in this area, so we have less debts than the equity zone, the healthy, well sustainable models. Although if you look in the disaggregation of ages and so on, as you may see in the tutorial of the interactive chart on avoidable debts and their proportion, it's not always so clear, but most of the avoidable debts are in the deficit zone. Still, some of the avoidable debts, over 3 million, are in the equity zone. The countries having enough resources but probably not using them in an equitable or an efficient or wise way. You can also do that for, let's say, the total GDP. So this means let's take this out from here so it doesn't show. And in the total GDP, you may want to see the addition of GDP of all countries. And you may see that it's concentrated in excess accumulation, as the previous spreadsheet showed, some in the surplus, some bit in the equity zone, where half of the world population still is, but very, very low, where almost another half of the world stays in the deficit zone, but only having a very small share of the GDP. You can also do that for these other variables, carbon emissions, GDP per capita. In this case, you would need to use, let me show you as an example, the, there we go, GDP per capita. You would need to here look at the average GDP of those regions, so considering the population. When you see a lot of numbers here, get rid of what's shown in the axis. And here you are. This is the GDP per capita. It shows, it doesn't really, the scale doesn't allow you to show anything in the deficit, and this is how high it goes, over close to 60,000 in excess accumulation zone. When we know, in fact, that above this upper threshold, well-being does not improve, but there you are. We keep growing and accumulating. This is in our nature. So you can look at this also, the proportion of debts which are avoided, the proportion of avoidable debts from the total of avoidable debts, and you can play with these numbers in this, we believe, very interesting interactive graph, and use it for your purposes in research, teaching, or help us improve our movement. Thank you.